Hello, everyone. Welcome to our second part, our station traveling across Europe. If you haven't guessed by the flags and the Eiffel Tower, our destination is France. Let's begin. Okay, what is France? What kind of country is it? Well, I'm sure you all know what kind of country France is. It is a country located in Western Europe, and it is so well known for its contributions to art, culture, and literature. And we're going to be looking at some of its literary traditions. Yeah, France is known as the epicenter of most most fashion magazines and a lot of the luxury brands. It's famous for its wine. It also has really good cuisine, and it is also known as the birthplace of Enlightenment and the place where the French Revolution occurred, shaping ideals of democracy and human rights. And it has made significant contribution to art and history, and it is no exception to the field of literature. So we're going to be looking at some of the best French writers and the best universal literary works that has been made in France that has resonated across all generations. Again, we're going to be looking at mostly 1700s to 1900s today around, and these are going to be kind of old classical ones that may not really resonate with the modern writer, but I do believe there in these masterpieces there is a reflection not only of the time but a universal kind of theme of love, of life, of empathy and identity, all these things that current readers can connect with and talk about. And that's something that it's part of what makes these books a masterpiece. And reading books from the 1800s to 1700s can also impress upon the readers in the 21st century as much as it did the readers written at that time. Yeah, so let's begin looking at some of the most famous works. Uh, let's begin. France is also known for its Enlightenment and Romanticism and Realism and all of these different literary movements. And we're going to be looking at different writers that participated in each of these movements and how they impacted the literary world that we know today. Okay, this is our second destination. Let us begin. We're going to be looking at four different novels: Candide, The Three Musketeers, Madame Bovary, and Les Miserables. Just as a heads up, my pronunciation is not very good. I am probably going to mess up a lot, but yeah, please, please pardon me for that. Yeah, let's look at some authors now. There's Voltaire, Alexander Dumas, Gustave Flaubert, and Victor Hugo, all these very famous writers. Voltaire was a famous philosopher and a writer. He contributed a lot to modern philosophy, especially during the Enlightenment era, and his works on kind of religion and how we perceive the world, especially because he wrote Candide in 1759, right in the middle of the Enlightenment era. That's kind of reflected on in his work as well. For Alexander Dumas, he was a playwright and novelist. He wrote The Three Musketeers in 1844, and yeah, his works are brilliant. They're really fun, and reading the preface for The Three Musketeers, you immediately know that it's not set in the time that he lived in. It's set in the 17th century, way back when there were cardinals and kings and the knights, and it's kind of set in the Middle Ages. Um, we're gonna we're going to be looking at that in just a bit. Gustave Flaubert, he was a novelist. His work is he is best known for his works on Madame Bovary, and last but not least, Victor Hugo. His works Les Miserables, um, just very famous work. Everybody loves it. There are numerous numerous movies, numerous productions in the modern era. It's just because his work is so vivid, the characters, the kind of interplay, the historical context that occurs, it's so vivid and so real that people absolutely fall in love with it. And these grabbing, rich books made by these authors is what we're going to be looking at today. Okay, let's start by Candide, by Voltaire. Candide was set again in this 1759. It's not set during that time, but it talks about Candide, a young man who is very naive and optimistic, and he is guided by a mentor named Pangloss, who like and they go on a bunch of adventures, and he has to witness and endure like death after death, trial after trial. They see wars, they see natural disasters, they're almost burned to death, and despite this, he wants to reunite with his love, Kunigund. So basically, what Pangloss teaches him is that the world that they live in is the best of all possible worlds, that it cannot be any better. And Voltaire kind of uses this humor and absurdity, he kind of juxtaposes, he contrasts the very, very deep and very significant misfortunes with the words, well, everything happens because it is the best of all possible worlds that we live in, and it must happen this way. And so Voltaire uses humor and absurdity to kind of expose blind optimism, especially that is in religion. And we can kind of connect this to the historical context that this was placed in, because Candide was again written in the Enlightenment era, and this was after the Middle Ages, when people were kind of looking into religion to explain everything. That is, when a natural disaster occurred, for example, people weren't going in and looking at, for example, the soil erosion to see the scientific reasons for it. No, they were like, oh, there's a natural disaster? The gods must be mad. Our God must be bad. Oh, we must have done something wrong. This must be a punishment. But this must be the way it always has to be, because this is part of God's grand plan. And this is the kind of thing that Voltaire just rejects. He says, no, like, that kind of blind optimism is problematic because it makes us passive. Because when you say, oh well, it must be up to the gods, it must be how it must be, then you just fundamentally reject the idea that it can be otherwise. And so this prevents ways to kind of reduce the suffering. For example, let's say a building collapsed, and you just look at it and you go, wow, that building collapsed, the gods must be really mad. Like three people died from the building collapsing. It must be the gods must we must have done something terrible. But instead of that, we could also say, well, yeah, this was a misfortune, certainly, but can't we do anything to stop this from occurring right now? Can't we look at the building structure to see why the building broke down in the first place? These kind of scientific and logical approaches to misfortunes is what was occurring in the Enlightenment era, and this is what Voltaire is kind of trying to say in his work Candide. And not to say that science or any logic that we have found so far just completely rejects religion. And I don't think he just rejects religion itself. He's talking about the blind optimism, this aspect in religion where people say, oh, it's all God's plan, so we can't do anything about that. That's the part that he is rejecting. And I think it is a pretty good part to reject, as a um, not as a not rejecting religion itself, but as an aspect of religion that kind of makes people live in a passive, accepting way, instead of actually seeing how best they can live in their current life. Yeah, so a quote is, Candide, you are very fortunate to be living in this world, which is the best of all possible worlds. Everything that happens is for the best. Do not mourn the misfortunes that have befallen you, for they are necessary parts of the grand design. And I do believe that lost religion actually don't say this. They do say that it is part of the grand design, but they do not say that these misfortunes are necessary, or that these misfortunes are good because they are so necessary. They do say, oh no, these misfortunes are very sad, but they are also part of the grand design. And these kind of nuanced views also is worth considering. But Voltaire, in his philosophical context, is primarily rejecting thinkers like Lebanese, who really viewed the world as like in this blindly optimistic way, and said that life must be the best because this is the only possible way the world can be. Okay, on a lighter note, let's move on to The Three Musketeers. This book was published in 1844, set in the 17th century. Yeah, and it follows the historical adventure of D'Artagnan and three other musketeers with him: Athos, Porthos, and Aramis. And that is why the title is Three Musketeers, but most of the paintings have four in them. One is D'Artagnan, and the others are the Three Musketeers. And these four, they join the King's Guard, and they battle against villainous cardinals and these adversaries, and it is celebrated. This novel is celebrated for themes of loyalty and just cavalry, and it really it perfectly captures the kind of atmosphere that surrounded knightship and cavalry during the Middle Ages because um, especially in Europe in the 1600s, like knightship was a big thing. It was so important that you kept your honor as a knight, that you were loyal, that you served your your king, whoever you're serving, to the highest degree, and that's kind of what they embody. And it's really beautiful. It's a lighter book than most other books on this list, so I would definitely recommend this to anyone who wants to try it out. It's very very fun. The language is pretty simple because it's translated. And this is the famous quote: "One for all for one, that is our motto. The motto of the four of us. We are four brothers in arms, and we will live and die for each other. No one shall ever break that bond, for we are united not just by loyalty, but by the very essence of our being. Our enemies may come, but together we stand invincible." It talks about the complexities of power and the necessity of certain sacrifices to uphold honor and friendship. It is a beautiful, beautiful book. And this is not a topic that you can see a lot in most modern writings. Like these kind of loyalty and friendship and just like I would die for you level of bonding is just not a very common topic, and I think it is beautifully portrayed in Dumas's novel. Okay, lighter on a more lighter note, let's look at Madame Bovary by Gustave Flaubert. So I think Madame Bovary, in a lot of ways, to me, reminds me of Oscar Wilde's satire of the Victorian ages because Madame Bovary is about Emma Bovary, a romantic young woman who is just completely bored with her mundane life and she wants something reckless and fun, and she goes on to engage herself in all these love affairs and reckless spending, and she seeks excitement and fulfillment, kind of like hedonism, which is the seeking of pleasure as the primary goal. She goes on to find new pleasure, new dopamine sources, as we would say, and then it ultimately leads to her downfall. And this is kind of similar to what Wilde was talking about, the kind of pompous, um, the superficial kind of beauty that was surrounding the Victorian ages. It's kind of similar because we're in here. Flaubert is kind of critiquing romanticism and materialism, just like chasing dreams that look sparkly and beautiful, but are really meaningless because they do not mean anything. You can engage in love affairs and you can buy lots of things, but what does it really mean to you, right? And and this is kind of a similar theme to what we see in our modern days because we see lots of people on social media that are, boasting a lot about their money, and not to say that that's necessarily a bad thing, but to say that these kind of romanticism, materialism, the always chasing of unattainable and too huge dreams may not be a very good way to live a fulfilling life doing what you want to do. And so Flaubert's novel, written in the 1857, still resonates with readers today in terms of what it means to live a satisfactory human life and how the constraints of societal expectations work in our lives. Okay, yeah. And a famous quote is: "She wanted to die, but she also wanted to live in Paris." This first line is amazing. She wanted to live. She wanted a life of luxury, but she could not understand why it was so difficult to attain. She felt as if she were suffocating in her small provincial life, as if she were trapped in a cage, longing for freedom. She dreamed of passion, of adventure, of something more than the dullness of everyday existence. And I think this kind of underlies the bigger problem. It's not necessarily a bad thing that you want something bigger, but it's a problem that you want to live in Paris, that you want luxury, that the reason you don't like your provincial life is because you want something sparkly, you want something great, you want something that is full of dopamine, full of excitement, because those things, the excitement and the superficial beauty around it will eventually fade. You can buy all these furnitures, you can buy all the best man in the world, all the best woman in the world to be with you, but that is not going to last. And without an internal fulfillment, I think Flaubert is saying that that doesn't mean anything. And I think this may resonate really well with a lot of our modern readers. Okay, let's move on to our next novel, and this is our last one, Les Miserables by Victor Hugo. This was published in 1862, and it is a monumental work. And what I mean by monumental is there are thousands and thousands of fans reading this every single day. There are plays, there are movies, there is, I think it was 2015, 16, a pretty recent adaptation of the movie that is just amazing. And it's a story about Jean Valjean, and I'm sure a lot of you have heard of it. He stole some bread and he was put into prison for 20 years because he kept trying to escape. But the reason he stole bread in the first place was because he was trying to feed his family. And as an ex convict, he's seeking redemption while he's being pursued by inspectors, and he meets people. Hugo introduces people like Fantine and Cosette and the revolutionary Maurice. And through characters like Valjean, Hugo explores the themes of justice, of mercy, compassion, and redemption. There is a pope, famously, in the beginning parts of the novel that gracefully pardons Hugo Valjean after he steals one of his candlesticks, and that's a beautiful reflection of justice and the social kind of dynamic that Hugo wants to present here. And the story also intertwines historical factors that were happening, like the June Revolution of 1832. It is a beautiful, beautiful work that kind of connects the ancient themes of religion and redemption, kind of Judeo Christian ideals, with more recent historical context of French at the time. And this is a quote by the Inspector Javert. He was a man who could not forgive the faults of others, and who lived in a world where only the faults of others were real. He was driven by a relentless drive to do good, to rectify the injustices around him, and yet, despite his best efforts, he found that society was filled with people who did not care for justice, and his desire for vengeance was replaced with a compassion he could not explain. And this again talks about the idea of justice, right? While pursuing Valjean, who was convicted for stealing bread for his family, he thinks, well, I'm supposed to be pursuing injustice, but is what Valjean did really injustice? Instead of feeling vengeance and angry at the wrong that he did, he feels compassion for Valjean. And this is the idea of injustice that Hugo talks about. Very beautiful work. Other suggestions, these are just ideas to exploring more notable figures in French literature. There is Jules Verne, famous novelist for writing Around the World in 80 Days, Marcel Proust, famous for In Search of Lost Time, and Emile Zola. I previously did not know him, but he was a famous novelist, journalist, and playwright who depicted raw, like very raw works of what people were doing in the working class, what were happening in everyday society, such as the Germinal. Yeah, so we've looked at more than 4 or 5. Yeah, we looked at four different stories, and we saw how they reflect human experience and capture struggles and hopes and complexities of life. And many of them were not necessarily based on France. It was all around. I think Hugo definitely was talking about France in his historical context, but the rest of them weren't really focused on France. At least not at the time, because Dumas was writing about the 17th century. But these all, I think, share the ideas, these universal themes of love and life and identity, and what it means to live a life fully and to the happiest degree. They all have a philosophical message that we as modern readers can connect to, and that is very, very beautiful. Yeah, so that was our tour around France. I hope you enjoyed it. And yeah, I hope you gained something more than just some quotes, but a bigger appreciation of these works and their kind of timeless relevance to our everyday lives. I hope you continue to look into all these different writers and look more into French literature. Thank you so much. Bye bye.